So the day has finally arrived. The long-awaited Hillsborough Law is being introduced to Parliament today. It forces public officials to tell the truth during inquiries or face time in prison.
The government says it will end the culture of cover-ups, but campaigners are warning the bill must not be watered down as it makes its way through Parliament. Joining us now, Justice Minister Alex Davies-Jones. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just established this will not bring accountability or justice for the families that lost their loved ones at Hillsborough.
Sadly, those families who have fought for decades for justice, this bill will not be able to help them, and they know that. But what they gave us a clear mandate on was to make sure that what happened to them, and sadly has happened to so many other families and survivors of tragedies that we know of, be that Grenfell, Manchester Arena, nuclear test veterans, infected blood, sadly the list goes on, is that what has happened to all of those people will never happen to anyone else again. And that is what this bill will do.
So I think people will find it extraordinary that there will now be a new professional and legal duty of candour, basically legislating for public officials to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So how have we got to a state in society where we just assume public officials are lying, and we have to pass a bill which forces them to tell the truth?
Well, yeah, it's a sad indictment of where we are, that we need legislation to do that. However, history and the horrific events that have happened to all of these campaigners and survivors, be that Hillsborough or Grenfell and those other campaigns that I've just talked about, show us that, sadly, this law is very, very much needed. But this law does more than just compel all public servants to have a duty to tell the truth and act with honesty and integrity and candour. This bill will also readdress that power balance, that David versus Goliath, that Mr Bates versus the post office. This is the biggest expansion of legal aid for a generation to ensure that families who are facing the state, any agency of the state in an inquest, will now have that adequate legal representation that they deserve. So they never have to face the indignity of having to crowdfund for a barrister or support.
Well, speaking of public figures telling the truth, hand on heart, are you completely comfortable with the Prime Minister's explanations over the Mandelson affair?
The Prime Minister outlined yesterday that as soon as he was made aware of the extent to that relationship of Mandelson and Epstein, and if he had known what he knew on Wednesday evening, he would never have appointed Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States. And when I read what was in those emails, I was disgusted, and I knew that Mandelson had to go.
But so much was already known about Mr Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Huge amounts of detail had already been published. The fact that he'd been staying at Epstein's house in America while Epstein was serving his sentence for paedophile crimes. Surely that information on its own should have been enough to stop him being appointed as our ambassador.
The extent to the relationship was not known. And when that was disclosed on Wednesday evening to the Prime Minister, when he read that, when I read that, I was truly disgusted. And there can be no coming back from that, which is why I'm glad the Prime Minister took the decisive action that he did.
Explain. So your responsibilities include issues such as violence against women and girls, criminal law covering child sex abuse. You're the Minister of Justice, of course, so, you know, our work includes, rape victims, victims and witnesses and other serious sexual offences. Can you just explain to our viewers why someone staying at a convicted sex offender's house while they were serving a sentence for soliciting a minor, a child, for prostitution, why that was not sufficient justification for the Prime Minister not to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador?
The Prime Minister has been very honest that if he had known the extent to the relationship and what was in those emails, then he would have taken action sooner.
But that was known. That was known. That's the point.
So why was that not enough to rule him out?
That decision was taken, the independent vetting was carried out, and the Prime Minister was not aware of the extent to that relationship.
Sorry, I'm asking you as the Justice Minister with responsibilities, including issues such as violence against women and girls and child abuse. Why was it not enough to rule him out as US ambassador that he stayed at the house of an individual serving a sentence for soliciting a child for prostitution, why was that not enough to rule him out? I'm not asking about what was in the emails that everyone suddenly saw on Tuesday night. I'm asking about a fact that was known at the time that Keir Starmer appointed Lord Mandelson.
Well, as the victims minister, my thoughts are always with the victims, and their voices have been silenced throughout this. They have been sidelined. And as the victims minister and the minister responsible for tackling violence against women and girls, it is my job to give those victims a voice in Parliament and through legislation. And that's exactly why I'm here today.
The Prime Minister was not mindful of that voice when he appointed Lord Mandelson.
What we know is what the Prime Minister has said, and when he was aware of the extent of that relationship and the abhorrent information in those emails, he took action.
Do you think it's OK or not OK that Lord Mandelson was appointed at the point when the Prime Minister knew he'd stayed at the house of a convicted sex offender? Was that
That was a decision. That was a decision for the Prime Minister, who made the decision on the information he had at the time.
And so,
had
as
the information been
Minister of
disclosed,
Justice,
had the Hillsborough Law been in place and we'd had a duty of candour, then we could have had more information available.
Was that OK?
Had that information been disclosed, then we could have taken decisive action, and Mandelson should never have been appointed. However, we did not have that information.
Well, look, we understand.
And what's important is now that action has been taken, and we, as a government, are getting on with delivering the priorities of the British people. Whether that's introducing that Hillsborough Law today.
We understand you have to hold the line. It's a very, very difficult position for anyone in your position to have to argue in support of what was clearly a catastrophically bad error of judgment. And you're not going to admit that. You're not going to say that the Prime Minister, your boss, got it horribly wrong. But let's be honest. If the characters in this drama were Conservatives, and it was a Conservative Prime Minister that we were talking about here who'd appointed Mandelson, you'd have him on toast, or her on toast, wouldn't you?
Well, what I will say, Richard, is that there were issues under previous governments and action was not taken. That was the difference here. When the Prime Minister was made aware, when the truth was disclosed, action was divisively taken and Mandelson was removed as ambassador. Those decisions were never made under the previous government, and that is why the trust in politicians is so low here. This is why I'm here today to talk about a duty of candour by restoring integrity of public service to the British public through our new legislation, by ensuring that people have a voice.
Yes, you're restoring that candour at gunpoint. If that candour is not expressed, then there's a risk of public servants going to jail. This is where we came in. That's how bad it's got. All right, thank you very much indeed for your time, Minister. We appreciate it.